Betrayal! I mean, okay, we know that Microsoft has betrayed we the users. See also the start menu. It won't change the number of ads that you see, but it may change how relevant they are to you. Does no one remember where do you want to go today?
Make some mistakes. It doesn't just do something amazing and good things. Where do you want to go today? It makes you proud.
I'd like to go somewhere that doesn't involve the operating system mining the stuff that I do with it for data. We're going to talk about how Microsoft has betrayed developers, people that develop in the Windows ecosystem. And no, I'm not talking about the dumpster fire that is the Microsoft Store, although we'll talk a little bit about the Microsoft Store specifically. No, we're going to talk about ARM and on the ARM platform and how it's not just ARM from a software developer standpoint, but also ecosystem partners that Microsoft really has not treated well, in my opinion. But we're also talking about the betrayal of laptop manufacturers, x86, Intel, and ARM. You know, you're not going to sell 3 versions of the same laptop, AMD, Intel, and ARM is going to eat into the pie. But the really insidious thing is that even if ARM is really crappy, even if it's just used as a prop in a scam, basically, Microsoft will say, no, ARM is really good. And so people that actually build laptops like HP and Lenovo and Dell will go to Intel and AMD and say, I don't know, we're going to need some more better pricing and some competition, which is reasonable, right? That's capitalism, as long as the products are good. What if the products actually suck? This is an ARM Windows tablet. This is Windows Surface RT. Microsoft would really like to forget about that. We're actually on the 3rd or 4th iteration on Windows on ARM. If the buck stops with Microsoft for a good ARM experience, they've had since 2014. That's Surface RT to get it right. And here we are, 10 years later, and it is still a buggy mess. There's a lot of betrayals. There's a lot of layers to this onion. I want to talk about it all, and this is going to be really fun and exciting, and maybe a little bit rapid fire, maybe a little bit spastic, but let's dive in.
Betrayal.
All right, so yeah, first, as I was kind of hinting to, Windows on ARM. Windows on ARM this is not anything new, and Snapdragon, Qualcomm, they really don't want you to refer to that as an ARM processor, and that's because there's lawsuits happening right now. The ARM ecosystem is really not healthy. The company that's doing a ton of really good stuff with ARM in the server space is Ampere. The problem with Ampere is that they haven't really sampled their CPUs. They're constantly sort of N+1 out. A lot of trusted reviewers, I'm not one of those. Well, okay, maybe a little bit, but I'm very Z-list. But we have people in the industry like Ian Cutress and Patrick Kennedy at Serve the Home, and people that are real, Phoronix, Michael Arbel. Those people are like the 3 people on Earth that should be first in line for basically everything. Now, if you need a computer janitor and you need somebody to help you troubleshoot and find really weird bugs, and I have the time to do that, I'm good at that. I can help you with that. And so I could be on that short list of like problem solving and let's fix this. But in terms of, do I have an army of 12 people working for me? Not yet. Although if you'd like to contribute monetarily, store.level1text.com. Anyway, those folks don't really have a lot of access to Ampere. And so, okay, ARM, but solid architecture, everything else. Amazon, for their part, they have Graviton, which is also ARM-based. Graviton's actually really good, but that has taken a lot of hard-won engineering from Amazon. And I know some of the inside baseball on the engineering effort that it took to bring Graviton to market, including things like Java. You would expect Java to work correctly on ARM, but the reality is that this was like $100 million plus of lift from Amazon over the years because people did crazy things with their Java libraries, including put x86 like binary code inside of Java libraries, which you only discover when you run things on other platforms. Now, Amazon is not rushing to release the play-by-play of all of the suffering that they did on those kinds of projects, and so you're gonna have things that happen where other people have to duplicate effort in order to figure that out. The same kind of thing is going to happen in the parallel universe, which is Windows on ARM, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a second in terms of like game development and binary development and that sort of thing. When Apple did this, they had Rosetta to do translation. Apple has actually gotten a little bit of practice under its belt in terms of changing platforms because they switched from PowerPC, an IBM architecture, or what became an IBM architecture, to x86 and then to ARM. And they give their developers about a 1-year period to do the transition. But Microsoft has been trying to go to ARM for a long time. Windows RT is very old. More recently, they tried the Surface X, and Microsoft once again sort of lost sight of what it was they were trying to build. The Surface X, by all accounts, was not a great experience. Fabulous battery life, not a great experience. Now we have Qualcomm's processor, which is based on ARM, but if you noticed in the coverage for that they paid for, Qualcomm insisted on blurring out the word ARM, and that's because ARM is kind of unhappy with Qualcomm. Qualcomm licenses ARM technology, but then ARM wants to maybe get into the game of selling CPUs. I don't really know what the kerfuffle is from looking at the lawsuits, because it looks like Qualcomm has the appropriate licenses to do what they want to do, and that's also got to give other ARM license holders, Ampere, Amazon, etc., a little bit of pause when they look at this and they say, wait a minute, is this entering the wider market? Like, what's going on with this? So the whole ARM ecosystem, not super healthy. Plus also we have the NVIDIA thing where NVIDIA tried to buy ARM. So yeah, ARM. Why are people climbing the walls to get away from x86 in the first place? Well, with Apple, they wanted better power efficiency, and they were really enjoying ARM architectures on iPhones. And Apple was able to get a lot of performance out of iPhones and later iPads. And so they were sitting around looking at this and saying, well, why can't we just run this on laptops? We need to just scale up ARM. And it's easier said than done, but Apple spent many, many years working on that. Under the hood, Apple's ARM architecture is really not insanely different than what you would expect building something like this. They just dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and they had really good follow-through and a really good top-down vision of what it was they were trying to build that they were able to get all of their internal teams on board with. And so that's all well and good. So for me, I wanted to look at what Microsoft has done and what Qualcomm is doing. It's weird because is Qualcomm a hardware vendor like Intel? And so you look at Intel or AMD and you look at their products, and there's a GPU component and GPU drivers and everything that goes with that. And you look at, what we sort of had with this. And with this, yeah, the buck kind of did stop with Microsoft, and Microsoft kind of did provide top-down support all the way from the EFI to actual program troubleshooting and everything else. You could open up a Microsoft support ticket for their dev team and get support and get stuff done with this ARM-based hardware platform. Well, with Qualcomm's platform, Qualcomm seems to be playing that role, but developers don't really seem to have a way to get in contact with the right teams in order to troubleshoot problems. Now, you may be thinking about the Windows Developer Kit, Windows Software Developer Kit. That has been out a while. There is a 2023 version of the Software Developer Kit. This was a disaster, though, because the software enablement on the 2023 platform did not at all match what actually launched with the Qualcomm Snapdragon-based laptops. So developers, the fastest way to get access to one of those was to really just go buy one. And reviewers really didn't get one. And the performance was also well short of what Qualcomm promised. If you go back to some of the very early messaging from Qualcomm, I think Charlie Demerjian at Semi-Accurate was the only person to really get clued into this and report on it very early. Qualcomm has vastly overstated the energy efficiency of the ARM CPUs. Don't get me wrong, they're doing better generally right now than their x86 counterparts in the current generation, especially before we have Intel's Lunar Lake. I mean, Meteor Lake did not launch with amazing power efficiency, but they had planned amazing power efficiency, and some of that turned out to be software bugs. Phoronix has got the scoop on that. AMD was head and shoulders ahead in terms of power efficiency, but also AMD was using some of their power budget for more performance and better GPU performance. On ARM, with what launched with Snapdragon, we actually do have amazing battery life, but what I would call lackluster single and multi-core performance and abysmal GPU performance. And so you save on all that silicon real estate. It's like, yeah, you do have pretty good battery life. The performance is reasonable. It's not bad for a first volley, really. It's the third volley. But in my opinion, it still falls well short of what Qualcomm promised. And is it enough different than the next generation of CPUs that are coming from Intel? That's a Lunar Lake, which I've already seen and got my hands on and been actually impressed by what Intel has been able to do. And also AMD. AMD is coming in hot with their next generation, which mixes their Zen cores and their low-power Zen C cores. Is it 4 or 5? Oh, he's not saying, is he? Look at that. And so are these there's a whole debate to be had about whether or not the new ARM stuff is going to be there in terms of hardware. It might be, it might not be. It's close enough. It's not for sure a win, but it's also not for sure a loss. But in terms of like the developer ecosystem, it is terrible. It is absolutely terrible. I mean, we already knew it was terrible in terms of the end user experience because Microsoft has lost sight of what it means to build an operating system, but it is terrible from a developer experience. But don't take my word for it. Let's talk to an actual game developer that has actual, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue and just see what it was like in terms of the game development experience for ARM. So, how's it going?
I'm doing good.
I've got Matt from Alderon. Am I saying it right? Alderon Games?
Yeah, Alderon.
So
not the Star Wars planet, not to get confused.
Matt is one of my behind-the-scenes irregulars that's keeping me abreast of everything that's going on with game development and Unreal and everything else in the context, irregular in the context of Baker Street irregulars from the Sherlock Holmes mythology. And so I get to live vicariously through some of the work that he does and some of the suffering that he does. But the suffering on this is so extreme, and I've been so flamboyant in this video. I was like, no, Matt, you're gonna have to talk about some of your. It's not just me. I'm not just saying that the ARM launch was rough.
Yeah, I've had the Windows Dev Kit 2023 for about a year now as well. So I've been just trying to get my game up and running on it to prepare for these Snapdragon processors. And recently we had BattleEye update their anti-cheat to support ARM, which was one of the major blockers of supporting ARM. And GPU driver crashes and 20-hour compile times and very lack of support. And I had an issue where the Windows 22 H2 or H4 update, I think it was, just wasn't deployed to the 2023 dev kit. So you developers kind of had to rush out to buy a Snapdragon laptop and start putting their software after it released to see if it actually worked.
Yeah, I want to break that timeline down just a little bit because there's two magical things that happen in the timeline there. The first one is that BattleEye was a thing for anti-cheat, and then the Snapdragon laptops you can buy at retail, and then a couple of days after that, which is when we're shooting this video, then BattleEye releases an ARM native binary. And when, not just you, I have reports from other developers that said, well, we reached out, and they said, don't worry about it. Lean on the x86 emulation. And they told me it didn't work. It literally did not work with their game, and they were just like, I don't know, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think with Fortnite Easy Anti-Cheat, I don't know if they've even ported it to ARM yet. So just the support of how is this going to run any games? I guess if you're not running any games, maybe you'll be fine. But there's a bit of a misconception of, developers will just upload their games and everything will be fine. And developer experience is great.
Tom Warren tweeted that Destiny 2, another game, another engine, another anti-cheat system, doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think with Fortnite, Samsung support said that the developer has to update their game for it to work. Yeah. But if the developer's saying, hey, Qualcomm needs to update the driver for it to work, or Microsoft needs to patch this to work, you have this bit of a cat and mouse chase whose fault it is.
Now, the other part of that timeline was you have a Windows on ARM dev kit. This is not the first time that Microsoft has done ARM. And so this isn't the part of the video that we were talking about where it's like, okay, there's Windows RT for ARM. But no, the 2023 dev kit, those have an NPU. They have the WDDM NPU driver stack. But this is from Microsoft for ARM. This is not really a Qualcomm thing. And so it's not really an apples to apples developer experience. But even that is not updated to the same version of Windows 11 that was actually shipping on the Snapdragon PCs. Now, to be clear, this is a Qualcomm processor we're talking about. ARM is the microarchitecture, I guess is probably the cleanest way to say that, but it's still a Qualcomm processor inside the Windows 2023 dev kit.
Yeah, it does worry me that the new Windows feature update is only on the new Snapdragon PCs and no one else has it. And it's kind of like beta, you can't download it, you have to get an insider program update. So I wonder, how stable is it? Is people buying this laptop just beta testers for the new version of Windows that can't run any games and it's really slow and has problems?
That has been my experience because the performance, I think, was, Qualcomm from the reviewer perspective, and I'm not inside baseball on any of this. I'm like fringe periphery Z-list YouTuber. And the experience that has been conveyed to me from people that are higher up in that food chain was, wow, I'm really looking at the performance that they promised a few months ago, and I'm looking at what they sent us, and not only was what they sent us late and badly managed, but also the performance per watt is way below what they were targeting. And certainly looking at game performance on what actually has been launched so far isn't that great. And your game will run on like potato class hardware. I mean, you've got Android and you're already running on ARM on the Apple side, right? I mean,
Yeah, and I remember Apple, they did develop a transition kit. You had a year to put your game to and it was relatively cheap. I think there's a Snapdragon dev kit coming out that isn't released yet.
now the new Qualcomm dev kit was supposed to drop June 18th. It still has not dropped, and we're at the end of June. Now, keep in mind the Windows Dev Kit is still a Qualcomm processor. It's just an older Qualcomm processor. It's ARM, Windows on ARM. And at that point in time, ARM was not hypersensitive to people calling Snapdragon ARM processors like they are today.
So if you're trying to port software, you'll have to buy a new Snapdragon PC. You get 16 gigs of RAM unless you're lucky enough to find a 32 gig of RAM model. So you're not going to be compiling your software on there. You're going to have to build on another PC and try to copy it over. And cross-compiling, it just seems like a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, Intel, I noticed also, they had a dev kit for Lunar Lake. I mean, okay, that's x86, but they're adding an NPU, the neural processing it, and so they have already seeded those to developers, apparently. And that's just an incremental, relatively, change to the x86 ecosystem. And what we're talking about here with the ARM platform on Windows should be something as monumental as what Apple did with the shift from x86 to ARM. And everywhere I've looked, it looks to me like Microsoft is fumbling this pretty hard. We were looking at some bug telemetry earlier, and it looks like there's a lot of crashes, which is surprising because I looked up your game on the Windows ARM Ready, and it's not. It's on the website.
There's more than 1,200 games that are being tested on X Elite and optimized, including many AAA games.
Yeah, I wonder, if I submit a pull request saying my game doesn't work, am I going to get rejected? Like, it's kind of weird that I'd have to go out of my way and like, hey, customers, please don't buy this PC because my game's not going to run. And some people buy a PC just for one game, and it's kind of difficult.
Is it weird that Microsoft put your game on that list without talking to you and says, oh, it works?
Well, the thing that's weird is that list is kind of ran by another company, and they're selling ARM porting services, right? So I think there's a bit of a, hey, sorry, your game doesn't work. Please pay us a bunch of money for it to work, kind of thing.
I'll have to check and see if Microsoft deleted it, but that website was featured in some official communication from Microsoft because they were like, everything is ready for ARM on day one. And it's like, BattleEye running in x86 mode or not, as the case may be. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, and a lot of vendors are just saying, hey, don't bother porting to ARM. No other games are doing it. You're kind of wasting your time. That just not really motivating because I'm thinking, hey, if I port to ARM, my frame rate will be better. It'll, use less power consumption and stuff like that. But it just seems like no one really knows if this thing's going to take off. It's been 12 years, of Windows for ARM. And people are like, well, will this laptop just be like the last Surface laptop that came out that was also on ARM? And just like, well, this is nothing. People just ignore it. New AMD and Intel chip come out and we just pretend like Windows on ARM never existed.
I've been surprised that the battery life from ARM so far is as good as it is, but the performance seems well below, like I was saying, of what was targeted, and the GPU performance doesn't seem amazing. But it is nice to see that there are things that appear to be built into the Windows 11 version of ARM, things like the upscaler, like it's just a toggle, and it's on by default for getting the super resolution, super sampling thing, I guess because the GPU just doesn't have the horsepower, or it's a power saving thing, depending on how you want to look at that. But it's wild that the people that need access to the hardware quickly in order to support a commercial product are just kind of like, good luck, go to Best Buy and pick up an ARM PC. It's like, that's going to just juice the numbers. It's like, the uptake was amazing. And it's like, we were held ransom. We had to buy this because there was no other way to test our product. And we don't know if people are going to buy it.
Well, I looked on Best Buy and it's out of stock. And, there's questions about, hey, is this a paper launch? How many people actually have these Snapdragon chips? And as a developer, the dev kit's coming 3 months from now. are people going to refund their laptop knowing that, like, hey, half my stuff doesn't work on it? And then as a developer, you're like, well, everyone's going to refund by then. Do we even need to bother porting, right?
While I was researching this video, I'd reached out to some contacts inside Microsoft, and again, anecdote. There's no way to put this together, but the impression that I had from them was that there are a lot of people inside Microsoft working 60, 80-hour weeks to last forever, trying to get Windows on ARM to be as first class of an experience as the Apple experience, let's say. Because the Apple, there is definitely a carnivorous earwig that goes into your brain once you've used Apple products, and it's just like, oh, this was an entirely reasonable experience. The battery lasts, and it basically does what it says on the tin, and the game performance isn't completely awful, shockingly, on the M architecture. And the more that they described it in the beautiful prose that they did, the more that I thought, I think Microsoft sees some of their problems with Windows, like the end user experience. Like, Microsoft is aware that a lot of users are unhappy with many aspects of Windows, like how the start menu works. And it's like, oh, we're going to roll out Recall and Copilot. And it's like, well, wait a minute. How is this, how are you handling user security? And then the answer is no. And then there's a lot of folks that have experience with the underbelly of Windows, like you and I. And it's like, wait, I've experienced a lot of suffering in the past. What's the plan for this? And so the impression I got from what was going on in the crunch time to try to get this thing out the door from Microsoft was that they see a lot of their problems with the Windows perception as related to the x86 platforms. Like, Microsoft's like, oh, ARM is going to be a new opportunity for us to do away with all of the cruft and all of the bad stuff. And then you see a launch like this, and it's like, I'm not sure that the reason that people are dissatisfied with Windows is because of x86.
Yeah, and I guess the problem with Recall as well is like, oh, it's a solution to a problem. It's unencrypted SQLite database, and I've had a lot of developers on my team say, hey, can I actually stop using Windows and move to Linux now? So I wonder if it's actually worse that made this whole situation worse when it's been problems in Windows all along. Like, they rewrote the Windows Explorer to use more like JavaScript and like website. So your Windows Explorer is a website now. And it's just like, yeah, it's laggy, it's slow. I maybe don't want to use it. Maybe I want to use Linux or something else instead.
It does seem to be gravitating in that direction. Proton has done some amazing things for gaming on Linux, and your game actually works pretty well on Linux overall.
Yeah, it runs okay. Sometimes you have the weird, glibc updates and break some weird dependency or whatever. But I think we support Linux because if we don't want to use Windows ourselves, even though with Linux copies might not make a lot of money, we want something to play the game on if we have to leave Windows, right?
Have to just keep that backup plan, that plan B warm, because it's like, what is going on inside Redmond? I don't understand.
Well, I think with Valve doing Proton, they've kind of been prepared for this kind of problem this whole time, where they're like, hey, Windows Store, there's no universal binary, for example, with this ARM stuff, so you can't package an exe and the ARM binary together as a one file. You have to use a Windows Store. So I'm worried that, is Steam going to support ARM games, for example, ARM native games, and are they going to pull away from this or bother trying to support it because of the problems?
The other, that's kind of related to like the crunch that I think that was described to me inside Microsoft for this ARM launch, is that I think a lot of those aspects of, the internal developer support that a game company would expect from Microsoft has become diminished. I think even Intel and AMD have not gotten any support from Microsoft in terms of launching their NPUs. Like the whole AI PC, this thing is launching, but like Windows Recall, the Snapdragon stuff, it's not even really using the NPU. Anything that has been launched so far, it's been kind of panned almost universally by reviewers. Like the bigger feature is that, oh, now the battery life is good, but AI features have not been featured front and center in any of the new Snapdragon reviews, at least that I've seen. And if you look at, the NPU architecture, NPUs a lot of the time, they're implemented a lot like a GPU driver. And so if you wanted to use that for a game feature, you probably can't, because even Intel and AMD are not getting support for their NPU driver for features, let alone an API that would let you have, an AI-enabled NPC inside a game, or something like that they've touted in their marketing. And then on the flip side of that, developer support just for like the GPU driver on Snapdragon is like, where does the rubber meet the road in terms of the operating system handling and then like waiting on Qualcomm to update something? Doesn't seem like that's been a good experience.
So with our game, NVIDIA, for example, we can email them and say, hey, our game crashes. Can you help us out with the GPU driver? We can get support. There's forums you can post on. They do regular updates. How do I as a developer get support for this Arduino driver? If I go to the Qualcomm forums, there's no post about Snapdragon Elite processors. I'd have difficulty of like, where do we go for help to importing our games? Like if the driver crashes, do we just, come back in 6 months later? Hopefully Windows Update fix it. Who knows?
Do you get the impression that Microsoft thinks Qualcomm is going to handle, end developer support on their hardware? Or is this like a Microsoft Qualcomm partnership? This is just speculation. It's like as a developer, it's like I've got to use Visual Studio, and it's like, oh, I found a bug in the C compiler. Like Microsoft's really good about supporting and fixing that, but in this situation, everything that has been described to me, not just by you, but by others, has been like, oh, I feel kind of out in the cold here.
Yeah, I guess the weird problem is if you have a GPU driver crash, people are like, well, it's the game developer's fault, or it's the Qualcomm's fault, or it's Microsoft's fault, and you don't really know. Sometimes as a developer, you can just like put a fence somewhere differently in the code, and maybe it doesn't crash this time, or it does crash. And we've had a lot of problems on Android with GPU driver crashes where they won't update their drivers. Your phone doesn't get Android updates for so many years, and as a developer, you're just like, well, do we just have to cut this device off this list of supported devices because it's too much work to support? And it's a bit of a black box of the game crashed. Normally you can attach like Visual Studio and debug it and all this stuff, but GPU driver crashes. I don't know if this Qualcomm have a GPU debugger. How do you fix this kind of thing? The Windows Dev Kit 2023, for example, uses completely different drivers from this new Snapdragon chip. So all the work you've done ahead of time to try to prepare this stuff might be undone already.
That is wild. That is absolutely wild. Like, how do you end up in a situation where you have a dev kit for ARM that is different than ARM as it existed for Surface X when Surface X launched, but is also wildly different than what Qualcomm is launching? And that Qualcomm, in the beginning, I was kind of thinking Qualcomm was keeping some of this really close to the chest because the performance is just not where they promised that it would be, period. I don't feel like a lot of developers have really called that out. So there's not really a lot of data. I don't feel like 100% comfortable saying that to back up all the data, but at least the performance per watt is not there. Qualcomm might be able to get there if they just juice the crap out of the CPU, but then at that point, you've lost your battery life. So it's wild to me to look at this and to look at how you guys are suffering and that none of the dots are connected here. It just feels like a very, very immature ecosystem. And so it's like, if this immature ecosystem is meant to challenge and take on Apple's unified, it sounds like your direct experience importing with Apple was different. And Apple historically has not been super amazingly friendly for outsiders doing stuff, and yet the developer experience is actually very good.
Yeah, and normally with Apple, unless you're a really top developer, you don't get that much support. But with this developer transition kit, we had a year. The drivers and stuff like that were very similar to the chip that launched. All the software stack was the same. So we had a lot of time to repair, and a lot of our users just ran the game. It ran fine. They didn't know they were running on an M1 or a new Mac, or maybe end users don't really know the difference about, CPU microarchitecture. Maybe they're just buying a laptop and just, hey, my game doesn't work, my software doesn't work. How is this my problem? I'll return the laptop.
Yeah, that's, Microsoft's answer to that was that x86 emulation, but when you peel back the layers on that, things like anti-cheat, that's exactly the kind of thing that anti-cheat is designed to detect and deal with, and those things are nowhere near ready on day one, let alone even probably 6 months later.
Yeah, and I think with a game as big as Fortnite, if they're not supporting it, it's hard as another developer to be like, well, I should go first and take the errors first. I'm a small company, indie game development. should I take the errors first, or should I let a bigger company take the errors?
I could see you making a post in the future. It's like, I am literally responsible for creating the Qualcomm Game Developers Forum on the internet because there was nothing else.
Yeah, you do a post on there, and you've got Epic Games employees messaging you. I'll be like, "Hey, we'd like our game to work too. What did you do? How'd you get it working?"
That does not inspire confidence. I feel like that I might be the only one pointing out the Emperor's clothes are not only invisible, they might be non-existent. All right, so with all of that background information, I can finally sort of hit you with the gut punch that I've been building toward, which is, I think Microsoft has lost the plot completely. It seems obvious to me from talking to people inside Microsoft and the people that are building the Windows experience and the Windows applications that Microsoft has completely lost the plot on what it is that they're trying to build. Most of the operating system seems like it is basically a scam. That's maybe a slightly too harsh of a word to use, but the operating system has basically become a scam to lie to shareholders to say, hey, look, engagement is going up, people are using our services, everything works really great. The real benchmark of how somebody will, uses and depends on your services is if it vanishes tomorrow, will people notice or be upset? If the Windows Store vanished tomorrow, will people notice or be upset? And the answer is no, because the Windows Store and Windows application binaries is a dumpster fire. With Apple, you had universal binaries. You could have one program that you run on Windows or ARM. That still isn't the case, even though we're on third or fourth generation, depending on how you count, for ARM binaries. You can have an installer. Windows, Visual Studio Code will help you build an installer that says, I'm going to pick the ARM binaries, or I'm going to pick the x86 binaries. We know that Windows is actually capable of this under the hood, and in a lot of the documentation, it actually talks about it, and some of the binaries in Windows System 32 and part of the Windows operating system itself are some type of universal binary, but it's really not a fabulous experience. Microsoft's developer experience is apparently so bad that not just the people that work on Path of Titans, but also things like BattleEye, not ready on day one. The people that work on Destiny 2 and Fortnite, which have hundreds of millions of users. And arguably, those games could run on the relatively anemic GPUs that we find in Qualcomm CPUs, just not there. Microsoft wanting to do the top-down control of the user and developer experience could be a good thing. I mean, they see that as a strategic advantage that Apple has, and certainly Apple controlling their ecosystem on iPhone and the Apple Store and Windows definitely is there, but Microsoft has lost the plot. They don't need that level of control in order to control the experience. If they build a good experience, people will be compelled to use it. I've certainly done my share of videos on how bad the start menu is, how badly designed it is, has become, and the Windows Store, where when you would search for things like Firefox, you would find scammy applications that no one seems to care about because, again, you get more applications in the Windows Store. Somebody's line is going up on a dashboard, and so they become complacent in people basically scamming people out of stuff. Windows doesn't even have its crap together on whether or not you should pay for HEVC decoding. You shouldn't, but Microsoft would like to charge you $7 for that. Or somebody on the Microsoft Store is going to charge you for that. What a mess. What a terrible mess. And if you're a user, you just want to use your computer. Like, it's Thursday. I really don't care if it's x86. I really don't care. I just want to do my stuff. I would like for it not to be in the cloud. I would like for it to not do weird things if I save a text document that contains the phrase, this content is no longer available. I would like for the computer to just compute and get out of the way. And it really doesn't need to be any more or less complicated than that. As a power user, there are certain other things that I expect. Sure. I expect to be able to disable the start menu from going out to the internet. Like when I hit the start button, there should be a toggle that is, whenever you interact with the start menu, don't hit the internet. On. Users want that. There's no option for that. There's no way to change that. If you're building an operating system that forces users to do things that they don't want to do, eventually it will reach a breaking point. Some of the AI features are like this. Copilot was not at all what was promised. The AI features of the new Qualcomm PCs were not at all what was promised. The developer experience for people that actually could have their crap together and build these kinds of experiences was not at all what was promised to those people. So we're not talking about end users anymore. We're talking about the people that actually build the experience. And so whatever Microsoft's vision is of their operating system, to me, was apparently predicated on the fact that we're getting away from our x86 ecosystem. We're looking at, what Windows is and what Windows has become, and we're noticing that users don't like Windows. There's a lot not to like in Windows. And we think we can fix that on the ARM platform. We think the ARM platform is new, and we can get a fresh start, and it's going to be great, and the AI experience is going to be great, and it's all just lip service and platitudes. Microsoft literally failed to execute on every single promise that they made for the platform transition in terms of user experience and how much it would be better and everything else. I will concede you have marginally better battery life in this generation. Okay. The betrayal of Microsoft's partners isn't just trying to negotiate for better prices on x86 or enabling Microsoft hardware partners to negotiate better prices on x86. In case I'm not being clear enough, part of the deal here too was Microsoft could go to Lenovo and say, we want you to help us build the ultimate ARM experience. And even if it doesn't work out for us, you will be able to take the ARM experience laptops that you build and go back to Intel and AMD and say, we want better prices. It's a win-win for you. It's a win-win for us. We'll control it. It'll be great. But Microsoft has failed to control the experience on the user side, certainly. I think that's clear to everyone. But also on the developer side, in terms of just, there's a GPU driver bug. Who do I ask for GPU driver support? ARM support will literally reply, you need an enterprise license and 100,000 people in order to get that done. PC development has never been that way, ever. Is this because ARM has never shipped to anybody other than Ampere and Amazon and Qualcomm? Like, is that what's going on here? Certainly, that's not dramatically better than the Android experience. Android has certainly suffered its fair share of unfixed GPU bugs. Sometimes you depend on Samsung to do that. Sometimes that has to be on Samsung's radar. Perhaps that's why Samsung was licensing RDNA from AMD. They understand that building a quality GPU is hard. A quality GPU in Snapdragon, not there. Security bugs seem to be unfixed in that. That's probably going to be more on that later. Maybe not. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it didn't look good. What Microsoft actually needs to build a compelling Windows experience for users is to refocus on what users need to work efficiently. It's not screen capture every 15 seconds going into an SQLite database. It is rethinking how users work and enabling them to work basically anywhere that they want to work. I mean, yeah, Linux as an operating system for, the unwashed masses or the masses of users is a little unpolished and it still needs a lot of work, but it has come a long way. And for the cavalcade of developers working not to the beat of even remotely the same drum, Linux is an incredibly amazing experience. But Windows doesn't have to be so bad that everybody abandons it in droves because it's lost the plot. Like, you don't want Windows to be just good enough that people barely tolerate the things that it gets up to. It won't change the number of ads you see, even though you've paid for it. It'll just make them less relevant to you. I mean, what a line. What a line to stuff into your operating system installer. Oh, Copilot's going to be on. You can turn that off later. Don't worry about it. Again, we don't want to give users the option to turn it off because we think once they use it, they'll see how good it is, and then they'll keep using it. The reality is it's like the start menu, where when the start menu interacts with Bing, a line goes up on a dashboard somewhere, and somebody says, yes, people are using our Bing products. But the reality, and the thing that shareholders should ask, because I guess they're the only people that can talk sense into anybody in charge of Microsoft, is, yeah, but if this product were gone tomorrow, would people notice? Would people be up in arms? Like, if Gmail shut down, there would be torches and pitchforks on Google's campus, probably. Google search has gotten less and less good over the last few months. How many people would show up today with torches and pitchforks if Google search was turned off versus, say, 2006? I think you'd agree that it's a much smaller number today than it was in 2006. And that's not because Bing is good. I promise you, it's not. Eventually, all of these betrayals will catch up to Microsoft. The users have a deep memory of these kinds of shenanigans. Development partners already don't expect Microsoft to get a lot of these things right. It's a delightful surprise when they do. They do sometimes. But most of the time they don't. And certainly with the ARM launch, they've lost the plot because there's not really good availability for people to be able to connect, developers to be able to connect when there are hardware and driver bugs. There's not really a good ability for developers to make use of the NPU hardware that is in there because secret sauce, black box, whatever, and because so many development resources inside Microsoft have been displaced working on the ARM launch, as lackluster as it is, because apparently it's a pants on fire, 4-alarm fire, situation inside Microsoft. Development has stalled somewhat on similar AI features for x86. Even though Lunar Lake and even though AMD's processors are going to have very capable low power AI capabilities, no one inside Microsoft was available to build out that functionality. By all accounts, Lunar Lake looks like it's on time. I was hands-on Lunar Lake development kits, which are already available to developers. How crazy is that? The developer kit for Lunar Lake is available to developers months in advance, whereas the Qualcomm developer kit, which was supposed to launch on June 18th, which is after the retail launch of the actual Qualcomm laptops, is still not available as of June 25th. It's a dumpster fire for the ARM launch. And if Microsoft is in charge of that, and Microsoft is the main company driving that, then Microsoft needs to take responsibility for this kind of a user experience, because it's literally this. Windows RT, Surface X, all over again. How is a $1 trillion company this bad at executing? And it's a microcosm from the smallest aspects to the largest aspects, launching a new platform. Everything is basically the same experience. It's disorganized, it's disjointed, the people involved don't have a clear vision of what the experience or how it's supposed to fit together go, and everybody that is working on it has their own agenda, which changes the message and the flavor somewhat. I think Microsoft is going to have to get a new personality that is strong and has a clear vision of what Microsoft's user experiences should be to drive innovation in the company and adoption. If they don't, Linux is just going to keep chipping away until it takes over the universe, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But what a normal person needs of their computer is changing. It's really document management and communication management and managing interruptions and managing life stuff. And this is going to lead to a fundamental shift in how people interact with computers, the operating system, files, and everything else. Like the paradigms of the last 20 or 30 years are going to shift dramatically when you can just have a normal conversation with a piece of technology, and it will competently execute on what your desire to get it done is. And I'm not talking about handing everything over to a large language model. I'm not even talking about like general artificial intelligence. I'm just talking about the paradigm of like, you sit down at a machine, it does some stuff, you can pick it up, you can take it with you, whether or not it's cloud computing, whether it's local computing. Software makes all of that go away. We can have that now. It's just a matter of somebody sitting down and building that vision. And I'm no fan of Apple, but Apple is certainly iterating toward a vision that is kind of like that, even with the AI components, even in a way where, people were looking at what Apple was doing with AI and saying, maybe we could get behind that. Whereas on the Microsoft side, I think a lot of the animosity, and Microsoft doesn't realize this, is because the end user experiences have been so consistently schizophrenic, where Microsoft says things like, this isn't going to change the number of ads you see. They'll just be less relevant. I mean, I think we all realize how craptacular that statement is. And then when you see similar statements about AI integration, it's like, oh, what fresh hell are they going to visit upon me with this new feature? What line on the dashboard has to go up? What sort of hoops do I have to jump through in order to compute? It's Thursday. I just need to get my computing done. I don't really care about any of this. One of my favorite things in putting together the stuff for this video was a tweet from Paul Thurrott. And he talked to some Microsoft executives, and they looked at the Apple experience, and they were looking at, Intel and Windows laptops. And one of the things was, man, Apple laptops are great. They're just so clean. There's no stickers or anything else on them. And it's like one of the reasons we're going to do this thing with the new Intel, like Centrino, or the new Intel marketing push. This is probably a decade ago, is to get rid of the stickers. And the stickers are still there, and they're Qualcomm stickers now instead of Intel stickers. So fabulous, just fabulous. That's amazing. That's an amazing situation we find ourselves in, because again, as an end user, don't care, just want to compute, long battery life, bright screen. Don't have, I'm going to close my laptop and put it to sleep, and it's not going to be dead in 12 hours from having been asleep at 80%, like just basic stuff. Like, I would like to use my computer. It's like, oh no, the battery life has to go down 3% per hour because we need to do 752 micro wakes per hour in order to make sure that your email is in sync. Again, like, Microsoft already promised that years ago with like the smart sleep stuff. None of that ever actually materialized. It was all a bad developer experience. It was all a bad hardware experience. Even having their Surface laptops where you can get the Windows EFI updates directly from Windows Update, it was still a terrible experience. Even Microsoft building Pluton, like driving the hardware for delivering those kinds of firmware updates to make a better user experience, so badly executed that the entire industry, more or less, bucked against it. An amazing accomplishment. The entire industry can come together and say, wow, this is a terrible idea. And the last bargaining chip Microsoft had was getting their hardware partners on board for the ARM experience just to use as leverage to get better pricing for x86, assuming that ARM didn't work out. ARM may ultimately work out. Like, ARM isn't inherently good or bad. It just doesn't have the engineering and everything that goes with it. The game experience and x86 experience being as bad as it is, and Microsoft being really quick to cite, though they might not technically be involved, and of course Microsoft being quick to cite, oh look, Windows and ARM, look, everybody's having a really good experience with this. This feels a little bit like astroturfing. Strictly speaking, the Works on ARM website is not Microsoft, but it has been referred to by Microsoft insiders in enough presentations and videos and papers that it's like, there's something going on there with Windows, Works on ARM. And certainly we've seen, at least with Path of Titans, literally just made up. Also with the Adobe Suite, like the Adobe Suite initially would launch and do weird stuff and crash on ARM, and then later when I was putting this video together, it just pops up and says, nope, you're on an ARM platform, probably not a good idea to do this for now. So I don't know, I want to revisit this in like 6 months or a year and see where we are and see if Microsoft has any introspection, because I've got some news from Microsoft. The problem with the Windows user experience, the friction that you're sensing, is not a result of the x86 ecosystem. I know internally at Microsoft, there's a lot of sentiment that, once we get away from x86, we will be able to compete with Apple. We will have an experience as good as Apple. I don't really think Microsoft should measure and benchmark the Apple user experience as the standard to look at. But even if you do that, the processor the code runs on is not responsible for the shortcomings of the software that's on the platform. And I think that is something that if Microsoft doesn't internalize, they are going to be less and less relevant going forward in terms of the end-user desktop operating system experience, period. This is something Google could probably learn from, too, with Android, because, man. I went to this level 1. It's been a not terribly quick ramble, but, man, Microsoft has betrayed everyone. If you got any thoughts or comments on this, feel free to comment below or hang out in the Level 1 forums. I'm signing out. See you there.